Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today it is the time to start doing my December wrap-up, which is the last wrap-up of the year, which is so crazy. It's currently halfway through the month and I wanted to share with you the books that I've read so far in the month of December, and then later on in the video I will get into the books that I finished up in December. But this month for reading has been a fairly decent reading month. I'm reading the most random books ever. Like, there's no genre specific type book I'm reading. I'm literally reading a little bit of everything. You'll kind of see what I'm talking about when I get into the books. I'm reading a lot of nonfiction this month, but obviously I'm doing fiction as well. And I'm just excited to share with you the books I'm reading. I don't know if a lot of people have even read these books. These are just books that like piqued my interest for some reason. If you have read any of these books, please let me know in the comments down below what your opinion is of them. But without further ado, let's just get started with the first book that I finished in the month of December. So the first book that I'm going to be talking about is The Knicks by Nathan Hill. This book I actually started in November and it literally has took me forever to actually finish it, but I did end up finishing it in the month of December. This book is interesting. It's been on my radar for a really long time and I never picked it up because of the size and it really intimidated me, but I decided to just do it, like just get to the books that I've been putting off, and this was top of my list. So if you don't know what The Knicks is about, it's a little bit hard to explain because it doesn't have like one concrete plot, but I guess how I would open it is the main character Samuel in present day, so it's 2011, was abandoned by his mom when he was a little boy. And then his mom suddenly re-enters his life when he looks at the news or watches the news and he sees that his mom basically is doing this crime where she's like throwing rocks at a candidate for presidency. So yeah, that's how she re-enters his life. And basically he's trying to understand, one, why did his mom do that in the first place, and he's trying to reconcile what he knows about his mother. So all that he knows about his mother is that she is this ordinary person that came from, you know, reasonable middle-class family, married her high school sweetheart, which was his dad, and then all of a sudden, you know, she up and left his life, and then he really didn't know much about her. And then he tries to understand more about her past and her history and what led her to do this political action that she ended up doing. And so the book kind of switches back and forth in timelines. So present day 2011, it stays in that timeline. There's one part where it actually goes back to his childhood in 1988, I believe, where he talks about some of the experiences that he has with his friends and also the moment where his mother left him. And then it goes back and explores his mom's timeline, Faye, her name is Faye, in 1968, when she is like her freshman year of college and she starts getting really involved in like the 60s and the, you know, radical movements and like the anti-Vietnam war stance. And so kind of explores all of those different things. So it's a really interesting book. It's basically about a boy who's trying to uncover his mother's secrets. And the reason why this book intrigued me so much is because it's set in the 60s, which is one of my favorite decades. And this cover obviously is absolutely gorgeous. It has that like 60s type or like lettering on it, which I really love. But so what can I say about my actual opinion of this book? Because I honestly really liked the writing style. I thought that the author did a really good job with the writing, and I think that he really knows what he's doing when it comes to like fleshing out characters and giving you like information. But I did struggle getting through this book because with its size, I just felt like, so this book is 625 pages, and I felt like there was so much information that he gave you that just wasn't necessary for the ultimate plot of the book. And I honestly would have preferred if this book was more around 400 pages, where he kind of cut a lot of the fluff and information out that really didn't lead to anything. And that's honestly where I really got caught up with it. It was like I really struggled with the details. And yeah, so ultimately, like, this book I think is really well written, but it was just too much at some points, and I just was getting really bored. It does explore really interesting topics, But another issue that I had with it was that Samuel, who's the main character, was really prevalent at the first half of the novel, and then I felt like he totally got lost towards the end. I felt like he had really good character development. I feel like it didn't really get finished out towards the end of the novel because it was mainly focused on his mom, Faye, and I would have preferred to see kind of how his story ended, because he had so many storylines in the book that like led to nothing, because I felt like the author really didn't finish them. But ultimately, I can't really like bash this book greatly that much, because it's obviously really well written and a lot of people love it. I would probably give this book like 3.5 stars. It's like not a bad read. I'm glad I ended up picking it up eventually, but yeah, just a little bit too long in an unnecessary way. So next, I read Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. I listened to this book on audio and I loved this book so much. This is all about attachment theory, and they go into the 3 attachment styles, which is anxious, avoidant, and stable. And it's just a really interesting book for anyone who is either in a relationship or is seeking a relationship. And I thought the book did a really good job of talking to all audiences. So for people that are currently in the dating scene and are looking for love, or people that have been married for 20 years and want to strengthen the relationship that they're already in. So just to kind of summarize what the 3 attachment styles are, so you kind of know what I'm talking about. First, there's the anxious attachment style, which are people that are really preoccupied with their relationship and they have a fear that their partner won't love them back. Then there's the avoidant attachment style, which basically equates intimacy with a lack of individuality. So they fear that if they enter into a romantic relationship, they'll lose their independence and they'll try to constantly minimize getting close to someone else. And the secure people are people that are fine being in a relationship. They're warm and loving, and they have healthy and loving relationships. So the book kind of breaks down all 3 of those attachment styles. It's really interesting to uncover what your attachment style is, but also to know, one, either what you're looking for in a partner or what your existing partner already has with their attachment style in order to love them better. It's better to just to know where they're coming from. This book I really liked because it's a nonfiction book, and one thing that I think I really struggle with nonfiction is that I feel like a lot of nonfiction repeats itself over and over and over again, and they just like tell you all the information in different ways. Like each chapter is the same thing except it's just told in a different way, and I feel like this book really brought you through so many different things and I learned so much. So not only did it teach you about each individual attachment style, what attachment style you are, but it also taught which attachment styles work better together. Obviously, secure attachment styles work better with all different types of relationships just because they're secure. Also, I think what's really important was towards the end of the book, there was a personal story about a woman who was anxious and she was with an avoidant partner, and the anxious avoidant attachment relationship is the most dangerous. And she was talking about a lot of the emotional abuse that she suffered throughout that relationship, and I think that's so important for people to read in order to recognize either what to avoid in a relationship or maybe see things in their existing relationship, because sometimes things like aren't as black and white in relationships to know whether it's good for you or not. And I mean, I would recommend this book to anyone, to be honest. Anyone who's looking for a relationship or already is in one, or if you're not interested in a romantic relationship, then just strengthening your friendships or your bond with your family members. Their thesis is that a lot of the attachment styles or attachment principles that we have in our everyday lives come from our childhood and what we see from our parents or how we were raised. And I think it's really important to note how people closely in your life, like what their attachment style is, so that you can kind of see or understand them a little bit better. And yeah, I mean, I could just talk about this book all day. I think it's so important. I just think with anything with relationships, I think it's so important to know yourself before or while you're in a relationship and doing the work and reading books to educate yourself. And this book did exactly that to me. So I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. It definitely became one of my new favorite nonfiction / relationship books that I've read this year, and I would highly recommend to anyone that is interested in it. So the next book that I picked up in the month of December is My Name is Caroline by Caroline Adams Miller. So in full transparency, I actually work for the author. I do some social media and other stuff for her, and she sent me all of her books, and this is her first memoir that she ever wrote, and It's basically about her experience being a bulimic and her recovery process, and all the steps that she had to go through. And obviously this was a very interesting read for me because I don't know a lot about bulimia or eating disorders, and I think that this was a really important book for obviously anyone who is in need of some inspiration or is suffering from an eating disorder. She gives a lot of insight on how she ended up overcoming it. What I found to be the most interesting was that she ended up going to this meetup where they basically, it's kind of like a 12-step process for people with eating disorders, and it was just like a support group that they would go and talk about their eating disorders, kind of like an Alcoholics Anonymous. And she just talked about how that really impacted her life and how it helped her overcome her eating disorder, and her work with a sponsor who is someone that is a little bit ahead in their recovery process, who basically mentors her and all of the inspirational things that they tell her, and how then she ended up sponsoring other people. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who needs it. It's definitely really interesting, and I learned a lot. I think it's really important to understand what other people are going through, even if you haven't or have never experienced it for yourself. And I'm really glad that I read this book because it opened up my eyes. Yeah, I ended up really liking this book, and I'm not giving it a star rating just because this is a memoir and I don't like to rate memoirs, but a definitely good and impactful read. So the next book that I finished this month, I literally just finished it a couple hours ago and I could not put it down. I loved it so much, and that is Group by Christy Tate, and it's how one therapist and a circle of strangers saved my life. So similar to the book that I just talked about, My Name is Caroline, she is also a recovering bulimic, and this is what I'm talking about, just understanding context. So although this book didn't go into her eating disorder as much as My Name is Caroline, just by reading My Name is Caroline, I had an understanding of the things that she was going through, and some of the words that she used, I just had a basis of understanding because I just read a book like that. But this book is so good. I loved it so much. It's like literally everything that I like in a book, and it's basically a memoir of this woman who goes to group therapy and her experience going to group therapy and her relationship with her therapist and her other group mates. And she suffers from a lot of things. She obviously used to have an eating disorder, but I guess she really struggles with relationships, and the book focuses a lot about that. She has trouble attaching to men because she always goes after unavailable men, and it just talks about her experience just like growing into herself. And because she kind of has like a fear of intimacy, group therapy is really great for her because it basically, there's nothing off the table in group therapy. You tell everybody everything. And I think what's interesting, because in this specific group therapy session, they don't have a rule where everything within the group stays within the group. The therapist really talks about sharing and not keeping secrets, because he feels that if you keep someone's secret, you're holding on to their burden. So they let the people in group therapy talk about what happens in group therapy outside of it. They also have relationships outside of group therapy, which I think is really interesting. And it just, it's kind of just like a self-discovery journey for her. And then what I really liked about it is that it kind of like went through the different men that she was dating. This book is so good, and I really liked her evolution and what she discovered about herself, and her relationship with her therapist and the other group mates was so touching and beautiful. And it just shows that intimacy and vulnerability is so important in relationships. And I feel like it just kind of made me realize that a lot of the emotions and feelings that you like stuff down all day every day to try to be normal, like they're all like bottled up and in there, and you don't express them to the people that you see every day. But just the way that they could be so vulnerable in front of each other and nothing was off the table, I thought was so beautiful, and kind of just was showing me a way that maybe I could improve my own relationships. The only downfall of this book that I would say was, I feel like the book mainly focused on herself. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but she obviously talked about like the other group mates, but I feel like they were always in relation to her. It wasn't like she was hearing what they had to say. And I'm not sure if she intentionally did that because she didn't want to put their stories in her book, because some people might not want their like deepest, darkest secrets in a book that's going to be read by thousands of people, but I thought that was a little bit weird that she didn't talk a lot about other people's struggles. It was always her struggles and how they helped her. Because in group therapy, it's like not all about you, it's about everyone together. It's like you're all in it together. And anyway, I don't know why I thought it was a little bit weird. It almost kind of felt like a one-on-one individual therapy session versus like a group session. But I mean, she did talk a lot about like the community that she built and everything. Again, I don't know if that was intentional or not because she didn't want to like out people with their struggles. But this book I love so much. I read it so quickly. I guess I technically would consider this a memoir, and I don't rate memoirs, but I think I just might give this a 5 out of 5 stars because I loved it so much and it's amazing. And if you're interested, and I know I talk a lot about therapy on my channel, and probably a lot of people like don't care about therapy. I just think therapy is so important. It makes me sad that like now that we can't have group therapy sessions in person or therapy sessions in person, just one-on-one, because everything has to be virtual now. And there's something so amazing about like the vulnerability of being in the same space as another human being. And I really hope and pray that one day we'll be able to get that back. But if you're interested in a self-discovery journey, or if you struggle with intimate relationships and you want someone to relate to in that way, I think this book can be really relatable to anyone on any level. She is like, I didn't mention, but like a high-powered executive at a law firm, and she has basically her professional life in order, but her personal life is a little bit messy, and it just talks about how, you know, she tries to improve her personal life and the entire journey from start to finish. I really, really loved it. So this book is a clear 5 out of 5 stars for me. So those are all the books that I have read in the month of December so far. I will keep you guys updated with what I pick up in the later half of the month. I think it's going to be a pretty diverse month with the types of books that I'm picking up, but I will see you when I get to the end of December. So it's the end of December, and I wanted to share with you the last few books that I read at the end of 2020. So the next book that I ended up finishing was 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Right Now by Jaron Lanier. I picked this book up on audio, and I've been trying to be better about social media this year, so I cut out Instagram and Snapchat, and then I honestly just use like Facebook and other platforms for work. Also YouTube, obviously I use YouTube a lot, so that is considered a social media, but I've been trying to be more cognizant about my social media use, and I watched The Social Dilemma, which the author is in, and talks about his experience in the tech industry and why it can be so dangerous. The book basically just talks about how social media is like a tool for manipulation and all of these things behind the scenes that these social media companies are doing that you might not even realize. He also gets into obviously the issue with misinformation and how there's been like a widespread of misinformation on social media and also clickbait things. He also talks about why social media brings out the worst in people and just goes through 10 arguments about why you should delete your social media. And I just think that if I'm going to be using social media platforms, I need to know what's going on behind the scenes, because I feel like I can't just be using these platforms and not realize like where my information is going and what's actually happening and how these companies are using me to make money. So when I first started reading this book, I was like, oh, this is going to be a 5 stars. This is really interesting. And then for some reason I like was losing a little bit of interest as I was like going along. I honestly think that this topic is really important, but I felt like I got enough information from watching The Social Dilemma, but I'm still glad that I ended up picking the book up. I also picked up Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport at the beginning of the year, which he kind of touched on these topics too, and how to get rid of social media out of your life or how to reduce it, and then also talking about like the tech industry. So I feel like I had already read a book similar to this, but I didn't know how to rate this book because even though I think that this book is well written and it's really important, it's just not a topic that is incredibly interests me. And I didn't want to just rank a book because, oh, I'd rather read a nonfiction book about this than this, so I'm going to give this a lower rating. That just didn't seem right to me because I wasn't actually judging the quality of the book. I think it is a high quality book, but for some reason, I don't know. Like, I'd rather just like watch The Social Dilemma. I think I did enjoy Digital Minimalism a lot more than this book. So something that really annoyed me about this book was that he used this acronym and he introduced it at the beginning of the book, and then he just kept using it like throughout the entire book, and then I like forgot what it was, but I was listening to it on audio, so like I couldn't just like go back and see. So I ended up looking it up online, and I feel like if you're going to use an acronym, like it has to make sense. Like the spelled out version has to make sense, and I didn't really even understand the spelled out version of it. So it just like wasn't like, I don't know. I was like, what do you mean? Like, and he used it so much, like the whole entire book. So anyway, that was just like a little complaint that I had about it. That was the last audiobook that I finished in 2020. So the next book is, I don't know if I would say my favorite book of all time, but it's in my top 3 and maybe is the top 1, but it's All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. This book I've read so many times. Like, I don't think I've quite hit 10 times, but it's like probably somewhere around 7 or 8. And I love this book so much. I try to reread it every single year. I originally read it as a sophomore in high school. I loved it. Paul Baumer is my favorite character of all time. I love him so much. I love the writing in this book. It's written in first person, and you just like really understand the thoughts that are going on in his head and the experiences that he's dealt with. But I should tell you about the actual book. So this book takes place in World War I in Germany, and Paul Baumer and a couple of his classmates are enlisting in the German army to fight in the war. And it really just talks about their experience fighting in the war and all the things that they have to go through. And it's really hard to sell this book because, I don't know, like it doesn't sound like an interesting read, but I just think it's so important because it gives you, or gives the reader, such a better understanding of what men face in war and the horrific tragedy that's faced. Just because, I don't know, like I feel like war can be glamorized, especially if you've never experienced it. And we see all these war movies and like all these like war heroes, and to know what people actually face, it just takes the glamour away from it. And I just think that's so important for people to realize, is like how much war really destroys men and generations of men. When I was rereading this book, there was actually a quote even before the book started that I don't know if I'd ever really realized or recognized before, but it really hit me this time on my reread. And it says, "This book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure, for death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war." And I really loved that quote because I really liked the idea of saying this book is not an adventure book. Death is not an adventure, which is what we're told like time and time again when we see all these like crazy movies. And I just love this book so much. I'm obviously planning on rereading it again next year. It honestly like breaks me open every time I read it. I think the end is so powerful, and I was like trying to figure out like if the ending is sad, if it's like happy isn't the right word, or I don't know, like it's such an interesting thing. And I feel like to anyone who reads it, it could be up for their own interpretation. But I would just love to have met the author of this book, just because he was a soldier in World War I and he was using this from his own experiences. I don't think I mentioned, but this is a modern classic, so it came out between World War I and World War II when it came out. And yeah, one of my favorite books of all time. I obviously gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars if you're not surprised, but All Quiet on the Western Front means a lot to me, and I'm excited to give it a reread sometime next year. So the last book that I finished in 2020 was The Lions of Fifth Avenue by Fiona Davis. This book is basically a kind of like a mystery book, and it crosses over many generations. So it is dual perspective. So it starts in 1913 with Laura Lyons, who lives in the library because her husband is a superintendent. And it goes back 80 years it goes forward 80 years in the future to 1993 with Sadie Donovan, who is Laura Lyons' granddaughter. So in 1993 with Sadie, there's books that are being stolen from the library, and she needs to figure out what's going on, which is like the mystery element to it. And then she ultimately has to look through her past and her family heritage in order to understand who's taking these books. And along the way, she learns a lot about her grandmother, Laura, who goes to journalism school at Columbia University. And then through that, she started hanging out with this feminist movement that was going on in the early 1900s, and like that was inspiring a lot of her work, and she became like a famous essayist. And then Sadie's just learning a lot about her grandmother and trying to figure out where these books went. It's hard to like actually give a description of this book because I don't want to spoil anything, just because it is a mystery, and obviously a lot of the things come out towards the end of the book, as most mysteries do. But this book was different than what I thought. I was really, really excited to read this book because it's The Lions of Fifth Avenue. It's New York Public Library in Bryant Park, and you know I love reading books set in New York City, but this book just wasn't what I thought it would be. The writing style was just really easy, and that sounds bad, but like it was just a really easy writing style, and it was like a little fluffy. I did bring this when I went to a cabin over Christmas, like as like my cabin read, and that's like perfect. It's a really good like light vacation read. I do wish there was a little bit more dense and more thought-provoking and thoughtful. It just seemed like a little too fluffy for me, which like really is not the type of writing style that I like, but it is more of a comfort read. So if you like comfort reads, and this book is definitely one of those. I also didn't mention, but there is like a little bit of a love story element to this book as well, because I know some people like that. I thought it was fine. I liked how the love story like wasn't the main thing in the book. The main thing was like the mystery and like learning about the two women, and then like the love story was kind of like on the side. But yeah, this book was like, it was okay. It was like a fine read. I honestly was like kind of excited to be done with it. I ended up giving it like a 3 out of 5 stars just because I thought it was like a very average book. It wasn't bad, it wasn't good, it was just kind of like, you know, a book. Did I end the year off strong? No. I mean, so The Lions of Fifth Avenue, not the best way to end the year. Committed and Group, which were 2 books that I read in December, were like some of my top books of the year probably. So I think pretty proud of myself that I found a couple of like favorite books in the last month of the year. But yeah, the last book was like kind of a miss for me. Not a bad book, not great. But anyway, yeah, those were the books that I read in December. That puts me up to 77 books for the year, which is the most I've ever read ever in a year. It's crazy. So because I didn't love the last book that I read in December, please in the comments down below let me know the first book that you are planning to read or have read in January, because I'm very curious what book you decided to start your year off with. But thank you so much for getting all the way till the end of this video. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in my next one.